of this classic Yashica box camera. I basically renamed the object. So this is the high poly. So a lot of times when I'm working on mesh, I will name, by the way, this is from Merrick Cormier, from who's now in 3rd year. One of the best high poly and low poly assignments from last year. So it doesn't have a lot of technical errors, but there are some problems with the mesh. So I mentioned this in a previous class, right? A lot of times, especially if we're sending our mesh to XNormal for baking normal maps, XNormal does not like anything with more than 4 polygons, or sorry, more than 4 edges. So a polygon with more than 4 edges is called an n-gon. Basically that means, you know, instead of calling it like a septagon for having 7 sides or, you know, that sort of thing, we just call it an n-gon, and that's usually to refer to 5-sided and higher polygons. A lot of 3D software doesn't like this. I don't like it. I find it makes modeling actually very clumsy and more complicated. It's harder to do UVs because you can't just double click an edge. Usually I try to maintain quads, 4-sided polygons, right? That's virtually almost always my preference because I find nearly always it makes my work faster. Now you can't always avoid it. So, you know, in a situation like this, this is a 5-sided polygon, okay, on top here. So when you guys do beveling, right, you see this face back and behind, it's actually a 5-sided polygon. So let me just expand the poly selection and try to isolate this, hitting Control 1. So you can see, right, there's tons of edges that make up essentially this polygon. Now this is on the high poly. So on the high poly mesh, if you're sending it to XNormal, again, if we're using XNormal, you will basically have to fix that mesh. ZBrush as well. Whenever you send something to ZBrush, if it sees polygons with more than 4 sides, it will say, you know, you've got some mesh errors, you need to clean it up. So in a situation like this where it's a simpler kind of flat, somewhat squarish polygon, I usually will do something like extrude a face, do a local offset, and even if the polygon looks a little screwed up, it doesn't matter because I'm basically just going to merge it to the center, right? So it's creating triangles all around, but it still allows me really good fast selection to go around in loops. And again, it avoids issues of sending this to ZBrush if I ever wanted to, or sending it to XNormal. XNormal is what I use to generate my normal maps, right? So XNormal allows me to basically compare 2 surfaces, and on the low poly surface, it will essentially capture the high poly detail and bake it out as a texture map known as a normal map, right? Now, one trick I've used in the past is to literally just go into mesh and say triangulate everything, but what can happen is that sometimes you get some really weird shading results, okay? Sometimes you get a lot of issues, but you can sort of see, right, all the stuff behind has triangles now. For the low poly mesh too, that, you know, it's an okay solution if you're desperate, but I don't recommend it. It's really only if you just, you know, you have a ton of bugs and you're really trying to just get something out. But it can screw up the normal maps, the baking. So like I said, I recommend kind of the hand method of adjusting this stuff. So like I said, on these sort of flatter pieces, it's so much easier just going and do an extrude face with an offset. Again, I'm going to try to go with a smaller amount and then just simply shift right click, merge face to center. Right, so it gives at least some clean triangles in an orderly fashion. I've got another tool as well, so if you're trying to hunt for these problems, I've installed this tool under the custom. In this new setup, it's the Dawson tab that I had on the shelf is now called custom, and I've got a little button over here called Bad Geo. So this is a script you can download for free online. I'll show you where to get that in a minute, but literally, you just click on n-gons, okay? N-gons, meaning more than 4 side, right? And it literally will go through the mesh and select those polygons that have more than 4 edges on them. So you can start to isolate and fix those specific issues, okay? So I'm not going to go through and repeat this method just because it's essentially the same thing over and over. I may sort of talk about 1 or 2 other techniques that I sometimes use, so I'm going to just undo for a second here. So I can show you this method that I will use. So let's say we have a polygon like this. So I'll take this face, I'm going to hit Control 1 to isolate this. And sometimes what I'll do is to create clean quads is simply go across an area that is fairly symmetrical and do Shift, right click, connect. I could use the cut tool, but sometimes the cut tool will be a little inaccurate and create an extra vertex and create a five-sided or a greater than quad poly somewhere else. And if you're doing this kind of work, this is where the G command, right? G is repeat last function, is incredibly useful. So I should probably also set my symmetry settings on here, just for quick selection purposes. Object X, World X, let's see, World X, no. World Z maybe, there we go, World Z works, so quick select. This is another problem I should mention too. So I'm actually trying to hit connect, and it may or may not work. Some functions kind of break down when symmetry is enabled. In this case it seems to be okay, it just had a little glitch there, but so I'm going to try to get as close as I can. Right, so technically, you know, this is very close to being an illegal poly, but it's a very, very thin quad. So I would go through and continue this sort of method of quadrifying things. Like I said, this is going to be really, really important on the low-res versions of stuff that you have. And I'll hit Control 1 so I can unhide everything else. So those are two different techniques, right? Either, you know, extruding a face in with an offset and then collapsing that new face to a single point, or going across in this sort of even fashion. So you'll have to kind of weed through your mesh. Like I said, X normal is very unforgiving. It does not like to see any mesh with more than four sides. So this tool is great as well. And also, I've noticed this issue, and I think this is a Maya 2018 issue.